They walked in 6 blocks in silence. It was 11:30 when they reached 47th Street and South Parkway, and the Regal was just opening. They bought tickets and walked in the darkened movie and took seats. The picture had not yet started, and they sat listening to the pipe organ playing low and soft. Bigger moved restlessly, and his breath quickened. He looked round in the shadows to see if any attendant was near, then slouched far down in his seat. He glanced at Jack and saw that Jack was watching him out of the corner of his eyes. They both laughed. "You at it again?" Jack asked. "I'm polishing my nightstick," Bigger said. They giggled. "I'll beat you," Jack said. "Go to hell." The organ played for a long moment on a single note, then died away. "I'll bet you ain't even hard yet," Jack whispered. "I'm getting hard." "Mine's like a rod," Jack said with intense pride. "I wish I had Bessie here now," Bigger said. "I could make old Clara moan now," they sighed. "I believe that woman who passed saw us." "So what? If she comes back, I'll throw it in her." "You would kill her." "If she saw it, she'd faint." "Or grab it, maybe." "Yeah." Bigger saw Jack lean forward and stretch out his legs rigidly. "You gone?" "Yeah." "You pull off fast." Again they were silent. Then Bigger leaned forward, breathing hard. "I'm gone. God damn." They sat still for 5 minutes, slumped down in their seats. Finally they straightened. "I don't know where to put my feet now," Bigger said, laughing. "Let's take another seat." "Okay." They moved to the other seats. The organ still played. Now and then they glanced back up to the projector's room high in the rear of the theater. They were impatient for the picture to start. When they spoke again, their voices were throaty, drawling, tinged with uneasiness. "You reckon it'll go all right?" Bigger asked. "Maybe. I'd just as soon go to jail as take that relief job." "Don't say that. I don't give a damn. Let's think about how we'll do it now, not about how we'll get caught. Scared? Hell no." They listened to the pipe organ. It was humming so low that it could scarcely be heard. There were times when it seemed to stop altogether, then it would surge forth again, mellow, nostalgic, sweet. "We better take our guns this time," Bigger said. "Okay, but we gotta be careful. We don't want to kill nobody." "Yeah, but I'll feel safer with a gun this time." "Gee, I wished it was 3 now. I wished it was over." "Me too." The organ stopped and the screen flashed with the rhythm of moving shadows. Bigger sat looking at the first picture. It was a newsreel. As the scenes unfolded, his interest was caught and he leaned forward. He saw images of smiling, dark-haired white girls lolling on the gleaming sands of a beach. The background was a stretch of sparkling water. Palm trees stood near and far. The voice of the commentator ran with the movement of the film. "Here are the daughters of the rich taking sunbaths in the sands of Florida. This little collection of debutantes represents over $4 billion of Americans' wealth and over 50 of Americans' leading families." "Some babies," Jack said. "Yeah, man." "I'd like to be there." "You can," Bigger said, "but you'd be hanging from a tree like a bunch of bananas." They laughed softly and easily, listening to the commentator's voice. The scene shifted to and fro over the glittering sands. Then Bigger saw in close-up the picture of a slight, smiling white girl whose waist was encircled by the arms of the man. He heard the commentator's voice. "Mary Dalton, daughter of Chicago's Henry Dalton, 4605 Drexel Boulevard, shocked society by spurning the boys of LaSalle Street and the Gold Coast and accepting the attention of a well-known radical while on her recent winter vacation in Florida." The close-up showed the smiling girl kissing the man, who lifted her up and swung her round from the camera. "Say, Jack, that gal there is in that guy's arms? That's the daughter of the guy I'm going to work for. They live at 4605 Drexel. That's where I'm going tonight to see about that job." "For real?" "Sure." The close-up faded, and the next scene showed only the girl's legs running over the sparkling sand. They were followed by the legs of the running man in pursuit. The words droned out. "Ha, he's after her. There, he's got her. Oh boy, don't you wish you were down here in Florida." The close-up faded, and another came, showing 2 pairs of legs standing close together. "Oh boy," said the voice. Slowly the girl's legs strained upward until only the tips of her toes touched the sand. "Ah, the naughty rich." There was a slow fade-out while the commentator's voice ran on. "Shortly after a scene like this, shocked Mama and Papa Dalton summoned Mary home by wire from her winter vacation and denounced her communist friend." "Say, Jack." "Yeah? What's a communist?" "Damn if I know. It's a race of people who live in Russia, ain't it? That guy who was kissing old man Dalton's daughter was a communist, and her folks didn't like it. Rich people don't like communists." "She was a hot-looking number, all right." "Sure," said Jack. "When you start working there, you gotta learn to stand in with her. Then you can get everything you want. See, these rich folks do their dirt on the sly. But the reason the old man was so mad about the communists was because his gal was too open about it." Yeah, maybe so, said Bigger. Shucks, my ma used to work for rich white folks, and you ought to hear the tales she used to tell. What kind of tales? Bigger asked eagerly. Ah, them rich white women'll go to bed with anybody, from a poodle on up. They even have their chauffeurs. Say, Jack said, punching Bigger in the ribs, if you run across anything too much for you to handle at that place, let me know. They laughed. Bigger turned his eyes to the screen, but he did not look. He was filled with a sense of excitement about his new job. Was what he had heard about rich white people really true? Was he going to work for people like you saw in the movies? If he were, then he'd see a lot of things from the inside. He'd get the dope, the lowdown. He looked at Trader Horn unfold and saw pictures of naked black men and women whirling in wild dances and heard drums beating, and then gradually the African scene changed and was replaced by images in his own mind of white men and women dressed in black and white clothes, laughing, talking, drinking, and dancing. Those were smart people. They knew how to get a hold of money, millions of it. Maybe if he were working for them, something would happen and he would get some of it. He could see how they did it. Sure, it was all a game and white people knew how to play it. And rich white people were not so hard on Negroes. It was poor whites who hated Negroes. They hated Negroes because they didn't have their share of the money. His mother had always told him that rich white people liked Negroes better than they did poor whites. He felt that if he were a poor white and did not get his share of the money, then he would deserve to be kicked. Poor white people were stupid. It was the rich white people who were smart and knew how to treat people. He remembered hearing somebody tell a story of a Negro chauffeur who had married a rich white girl, and the girl's family had shipped the couple out of the country and had supplied them with money. Yes, his going to work for the Daltons was something big. Mr. Dalton was a millionaire. Maybe Mary Dalton was a hot kind of girl. Maybe she spends lots of money. Maybe she'd like to come to the South Side and see the sights sometimes. Or maybe she had a secret sweetheart and only he would know about it because he would have to drive her around. Maybe she would give him money not to tell. He was a fool for wanting to rob Lumps just when he was about to get a good job. Why hadn't he thought of that before? Why take a fool's chance when other things, big things, could happen? If something slipped up this afternoon, he would be out of a job and in jail, maybe. And he wasn't so hot about robbing Blums anyways. He frowned in the darkened movie theater, hearing the roll of the tom-toms and the screams of black men and women dancing free and wild, men and women who were adjusted to their soil and at home in their worlds, secure from fear and hysteria. Come on, Bigger, Jack said, we gotta go. Huh? It's 20 to 3. He rose and walked down the dark aisle over the soft, invisible carpet. He had seen practically nothing of the picture, but he did not care. As he walked into the lobby, his insides tightened again with the thought of Gus and Blums. Swell, wasn't it? Yeah, it was a killer, Bigger said. He walked alongside Jack briskly until they came to 39th Street. We better get our guns, Bigger said. Yeah, we got about 15 minutes. Okay. So long. He walked home with a mounting feeling of fear. When he reached his doorway, he hesitated about going up. He didn't want to rob Blums. He was scared. He had to go through with it now. Noiselessly, he went up the steps and inserted his key in the lock. The door swung in silently, and he heard his mother singing behind the curtain. Lord, I want to be a Christian, in my heart, in my heart. Lord, I want to be a Christian, in my heart, in my heart. He tiptoed into the room and lifted the top mattress of his bed and pulled forth the gun and slipped it inside of his shirt. Just as he was about to open the door, his mother paused in her singing. That you, Bigger? He stepped quickly into the outer hallway and slammed the door and bounded headlong down the stairs. He went to the vestibule and swung through the door into the street, feeling that ball of hot tightness growing larger and heavier in his stomach and chest. He opened his mouth to breathe. He headed for Doc's and came to the door and looked inside. Jack and GH were shooting pool at the rear table. Gus was not there. He felt a slight lessening of nervous tension and swallowed. He looked up and down the street. Very few people were out, and the cop was not in sight. The clock in the window across the street told him that it was 12 minutes to 3. Well, this was it. He had to go in. He lifted his left hand and wiped sweat from his forehead in a long, slow gesture. He hesitated a moment longer at the door, then went in, walking the firm steps to the rear table. He did not speak to Jack or GH, nor they to him. He lit a cigarette with shaking fingers and watched the spinning billiard balls roll and gleam and clack over the green stretch of cloth, dropping into holes after bounding to and fro from the rubber cushions. He felt impelled to say something to ease the swelling in his chest. Hurriedly, he flicked his cigarette into a spittoon and with twin eddies of blue smoke jutting from his black nostrils, shouted hoarsely, Jack, I bet you 2 bits you can't make it. Jack did not answer. The ball shot straight across the table and vanished into a side pocket. You would have lost, Jack said. Too late now, Bigger said. You wouldn't bet, so you lost. He spoke without looking. His entire body hungered for keen sensation. something exciting and violent to relieve the tautness. It was now 10 minutes to 3, and Gus had not come. If Gus stayed away much longer, it would be too late, and Gus knew that. If they were going to do anything, it certainly ought to be done before folks started coming into the streets to buy their food for supper, and while the cop was down on the other end of the block. That bastard, Bigger said. I knew it. Oh, he'll be along, Jack said. Sometimes I'd like to cut his yellow heart out, Bigger said, fingering the knife in his pocket. Maybe he's hanging around some meat, G.H. said. He's just scared, Bigger said, scared to rob a white man. The billiard balls clacked. Jack chalked his cue stick, and the metallic noise made Bigger grit his teeth until they ached. He didn't like that noise. It made him feel like cutting something with his knife. If he makes us miss this job, I'll fix him so help me, Bigger said. He oughtn't be late. Every time somebody's late, things go wrong. Look at the big guys. You don't ever hear of them being late, do you? Nah, they work like clocks. Ain't none of us got more guts than Gus, G.H. said, and he's been with us every time. Aw, shut your trap, Bigger said. There you go again, Bigger, G.H. said. Gus was talking about how you act this morning. You get too nervous when somebody's coming off. Don't tell me I'm nervous, Bigger said. If we don't do it today, we can do it tomorrow, Jack said. Tomorrow is Sunday, fool. Bigger, for Christ's sake, don't holler, Jack said tensely. Bigger looked at Jack hard and long and turned away with a grimace. Don't tell the world what we're trying to do, Jack whispered in a mollifying tone. Bigger walked to the front of the store and stood looking out of the plate glass window. Then suddenly he felt sick. He saw Gus coming along the street, and his muscles stiffened. He was going to do something to Gus, just what he did not know. As Gus neared him, he heard him whistling. The merry-go-round broke down. The door swung in. Hi, Bigger, Gus said. Bigger did not answer. Gus passed him and started toward the rear tables. Bigger whirled and kicked him hard. Gus flopped on his face with a single movement of his body. With a look that showed that he was looking at Gus on the floor and at Jack and G.H. at the rear table and at Doc, looking at them all at once in a kind of smiling, roving, turning slowly glance, Bigger laughed, softly at first, then harder, louder, hysterically, feeling something like hot water bubbling inside of him and trying to come out. Gus got up and stood, quiet, his mouth open and his eyes dead black with hate. Take it easy, boys, Doc said, looking up from behind his counter and then bending over again. What you kicked me for? Gus asked. 'Cause I wanted to, Bigger said. Gus looked at Bigger with lowered eyes. J.H. and Jack leaned on their cue sticks and watched silently. I'm going to fix you one of these days, Gus threatened. Say that again, Bigger said. Doc laughed, straightening and looking at Bigger. Lay off the boy, Bigger. Gus turned and walked toward the rear tables. Bigger, with an amazing bound, grabbed him in the back of his collar. I asked you to say that again. Quit, Bigger, Gus spluttered, choking, sinking to his knees. Don't tell me to quit. The muscle of his body gave a tightening lunge when he saw his fist come down on the side of Gus's head. He had struck him really before he was conscious of doing it. Don't hurt him, Jack said. I'll kill him, Bigger said, through shut teeth, tightening his hold on Gus's collar, choking him harder. Turn me loose, Gus gurgled, struggling. Make me, Bigger said, drawing his fingers tighter. Gus was very still, resting on his knees. Then, like a taut bow finding release, he sprang to his feet, shaking loose from Bigger and turning to get away. Bigger staggered back against the wall, breathless for a moment. Bigger's hand moved so swiftly that nobody saw it. A gleaming blade flashed. He made a long step, as graceful as an animal leaping, threw out his left foot, and tripped Gus to the floor. Gus turned over to rise, but Bigger was on top of him, and with the knife open and ready. Get up, and I'll slice your tonsils. Gus lay still. That's all right, Bigger said. Gus said in surrender, let me up. You trying to make a fool out of me, ain't you? No, Gus said, his lips scarcely moving. You goddamn right you ain't, Bigger said. His face softened a bit, and the hard glint of his bloodshot eyes died. But he would still knelt with the open knife. Then he stood. Get up, he said. Please, Bigger. You want me to slice you? He stooped again and placed the knife at Gus's throat. Gus did not move, and his large black eyes looked pleadingly. Bigger was not satisfied. He felt his muscles tightening again. Get up. I ain't going to ask you no more. Gus stood slowly. Bigger held the open blade in an inch from Gus's lips. Lick it, Bigger said, his body tingling with elation. Gus's eyes filled with tears. Lick it, I said. You think I'm playing? Gus looked around the room without moving his head, just rolling his eyes in a mute appeal for help. But no one moved. Bigger's left fist was slowly lifting to strike. Gus's lips moved toward the knife. He stuck out his tongue and touched the blade. Gus's lips quivered, and tears streamed down his cheeks. Ha, 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 Doc laughed. I'll leave him alone, Jack called. Bigger watched Gus with lips twisted in a crooked smile. Say, Bigger, ain't you scared I'm enough? Doc asked. Bigger did not answer. His eyes gleamed hard again, pregnant with another idea. Put your hands up, way up, he said. Gus swallowed and stretched his hands high along the wall. Leave him alone, Bigger, GH called weakly. I'm doing this, Bigger said. He put the tip of blade into Gus's shirt and then made an arc with his arm as though cutting a circle. How would you like me to cut your belly button out? Gus did not answer. Sweat trickled down his temples. His lips hung wide loose. Shut them liver lips of yours. Gus did not move a muscle. Bigger pushed the knife harder into Gus's stomach. Bigger, Gus said with a tense whisper. Shut your mouth. Gus shut his mouth. Doc laughed. Jack and GH laughed. Then Bigger stepped back and looked at Gus with a smile. You clown, he said. Put your hands down and sit on that chair. He watched Gus sit. That ought to teach you not to be late next time. See? We ain't late, Bigger. We still got time. Shut it. It is late, Bigger said commandingly. Bigger turned aside, then, hearing a sharp scrape on the floor, stiffened. Gus sprang from the chair and grabbed a billiard ball from the table and threw it with a half sob and half curse. Bigger flung his head upwards to shield his face, and the impact of the ball struck his wrist. He had his eyes shut when he had glimpsed the ball sailing through the air toward him, and when he opened his eyes, Gus was flying through the rear door, and at the same time he heard the ball hit the floor and roll away. A hard pain throbbed in his hand. He sprang forward, cursing, "You son of a bitch." He slipped on a cue stick lying in the middle of the floor and tumbled forward. That's enough now, Bigger, Doc said, laughing. Jack and GH also laughed. Bigger rose and faced him, holding his hurt hand. His eyes were red, and he stared with speechless hate. Just keep laughing, he said. Behave yourself, boy, Doc said. Just keep laughing, Bigger said again, taking out his knife. What you gonna do now? Doc cautioned. Ah, Bigger, Jack said, backing away toward the rear door. You done spoiled things now, GH said. I reckon that was what you wanted. You go to hell, Bigger shouted, drowning out GH's voice. Doc bent down behind the counter, and when he stood up, he had something in his hand which he did not show. He stood there laughing. White spittle showed at the corner of Bigger's lips. He walked to the billiard table, his eyes on Doc. Then he began to cut the green cloth on the table with long, sweeping strokes of his arm. He never took his eyes from Doc's face. Why, you son of a bitch, Doc said. I'd to shoot you, so help me God. Get out before I call a cop. Bigger walked slowly past Doc, looking at him, not hurrying, and holding the open knife in his hand. He paused in the doorway and looked back. Jack and GH were gone. Get out of here, Doc said, showing a gun. Don't you like it? Bigger asked. Get out before I shoot you, Doc said, and don't you ever set your black feet inside here again. Doc was angry and Bigger was afraid. He shut the knife and slipped it in his pocket and swung through the door to the street. He blinked his eyes from the bright sunshine. His nerves were so taut that he had difficulty in breathing. Halfway down the block, he passed Blum's store. He looked out the corner of his eyes through the plate glass window and saw that Blum was alone and that the store was empty of customers. Yes, they would have had time to rob the store. In fact, they still had time. He had lied to Gus and GH and Jack. He walked on. There was not a policeman in sight. Yes, they could have robbed the store and could have gotten away. He had hoped the fight he had had with Gus covered up what he was trying to hide. At least the fight made him feel the equal of them. And he felt the equal of Doc, too. Had he not slashed his table and dared him to use his gun? He had an overwhelming desire to be alone. He walked to the middle of the next block and turned into an alley. He began to laugh, softly, tensely. He stopped still in his tracks and felt something warm roll down his cheek and brushed it away. Jesus, he breathed. I laughed so hard I cried. Carefully, he dried his face on his coat sleeve and then stood for 2 whole minutes staring at the shadow of the telephone pole on the alley pavement. Suddenly, he straightened and walked on with a single expulsion of breath. What the hell? He stumbled violently over a tiny crack in the pavement. God damn, he said. When he reached the end of the alley, he turned into a street, walking slowly in the sunshine, his hands jammed deep in his pockets, his head down, depressed. He went home and sat in a chair by the window, looking out dreamily. That you, Bigger? His mother called from behind the curtain. Yeah, he said. What you run in here run out for a little while ago? Nothing. Don't you go and get into no trouble now, boy. Ah, Ma, leave me alone. He listened a while to her rubbing clothes on the metal washboard. Then he gazed abstractly into the street, thinking of how he had felt when he fought Gus in Doc's pool room. He was relieved and glad that in an hour he was going to see about that job at the Dalton place. He was disgusted with the gang. He knew that what had happened today put an end to his being with them in any more jobs. Like a man staring regretfully but hopelessly at the stump of a cut-off arm or leg, he knew that the fear of robbing a white man had had hold of him when he started the fight with Gus. But he knew it in a way that kept it from coming to his mind in the form of a hard and sharp idea. His confused emotions had made him feel instinctively that it would be better to fight Gus and spoil the plan of the robbery than to confront a white man with a gun. But he kept this knowledge of his fear thrust firmly down in him. His courage to live depended upon how successfully his fear was hidden from his consciousness. He had fought Gus because Gus was late. That was the reason his emotions accepted, and he did not try to justify himself on his own eyes, or in the eyes of the gang. He did not think enough of them to feel that he had to. He did not consider himself as responsible to them for what he did, even though they had been involved as deeply as he had in the planned robbery. He felt that same way toward everyone. As long as he could remember, he had never been responsible to anyone. The moment a situation became so that it extracted something of him, he rebelled. That was the way he lived. He passed his days trying to defeat or gratify powerful impulses in a world he feared. Outside his window, he saw the sun dying over the rooftops in the western sky and watched the first shade of dusk fall. Now and then a streetcar ran past. The dusty radiator hissed in the far end of the room. All day long it had been spring-like, but now dark clouds were slowly swallowing the sun. All at once the street lamps came on, and sky was black and close to the housetops.